Well, you guys have spoken and I have answered. Today I'm going to look at Nuxt UI, a UI library for modern web apps that uses Tailwind. Last week I used Tailwind Prime View and everybody told me I needed to use Nuxt UI, so I thought it'd be fun to create an application using it and also just take a look at how to set it up. So I'm just going to create a simple to-do app. It's actually going to be backed up by AWS Amplify. It's going to use our new JavaScript v6 server, but you can add a to-do, mow the lawn, jet ski, and then you can delete it as well by just clicking the delete button. Fairly straightforward, but I just wanted to show some of the UI inputs, the buttons, the cards, the icons that you can use. So there's a whole lot of stuff you can do. Let's dive in. All right, so let's take this UI library out for a spin. And we'll also look at some backend stuff. But first, I want to go ahead and get this up and running. So I have a brand new Nuxt app here straight out of the box. And the first thing that I need to do, according to the Nuxt UI documentation, is install the NPM module. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. Now, while it's installing, looks like it was quick. It's installed. We need to do a couple more things. If you click Get Started, it also asks you to add in this modules. So I'm going to go into my Nuxt config and let's add that in. And so now I have this new module, and that's essentially the beginning of the setup. One thing I like to do though is, since this is based on Tailwind, we can set up the Tailwind config, and I like to have that there for the future. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to do npx tailwind init. And if you don't know, that's a command that creates the Tailwind config.js file. And if I look at it, it's just going to be what it is out of the box. There's no configurations in here, but I'm glad to have it in case and later on I want to make changes. Another thing that I like to do, and if you look here, there is an app config file. And this app config file is essentially where you're going to put your theming. You can make global changes for all your different files. So I'm going to go ahead and create that as well. app.config.ts. I just want to keep it in here. I'm going to leave it just empty for now, but I'll do export default define app config. So now if I come down here, so now I see my auto completion. I have my UI and Nuxt icon, and I can come in here and make changes to any of the components that this library has. And I'll show you in a second how that works. I think one of the first things I do in any new library is just get the hello world working. I don't know about you, I don't love the single page app view. So I always change it to the pages. So I'm going to change it to Nuxt page here. And now I'm going to add a new pages folder. So I'll do that real quickly. I installed this new extension called advanced new file. I really like it. What I can do is I can select what the root folder is. I'll do / and then I can put in what I want to add. So I'm going to add in the pages and the index.view, and it'll go ahead and automatically create those that file and folder for me. And then I'm using another real nice extension called View Snippets from Sarah Drasner, and this created this snippet here for me. And the first thing I want to do is I'll just do hello world. And first I want to make sure my Tailwind works. So I'm going to use class, and then I'm going to use a few common Tailwind utility classes. And now to see if the components work, the way the components work in Nuxt UI is they all are prefixed with U at the beginning. So if I go U here, I'll have UButton. And if I just do UButton like this, I just see a circle round because I didn't actually add a label or anything to it. So there's a couple of ways in a button that I can do things. Is I can just add this label text. I can add in this is a button, and it adds it in there. Or kind of what traditionally most buttons look like is you have a closing tag, and just in between the opening and closing tag, you write something here. So here is just a normal button. Let's talk a little bit about some configurations of this button that I've learned. And you can look at in the documentation. So if you come back up here, hamburger menu button, go down to elements and then to button, you'll see a whole bunch of different props. Some props that I think are pretty nice to have is color. So I can just do color, and let's say I want to do it purple. And now I have a purple button. Another really common one is one called variant. So you have a whole bunch of different variant options: ghost, link, outline, soft, and solid. So ghost, look at that one first. When you do the mouse hover over, then you see it. It's very subtle, but you can do things like link, which makes it a link. Outline, I kind of like this as a little bit of a green outline to it. Soft, which it's a little bit of soft variant to it. And then it defaults to solid. Other than color, There's a lot of other ways you can change the look and feel of this button since we are dealing with Tailwind and the underside of it. First, probably the most common way is just to add classes. So if I add class here, background teal 800, and now I have this background teal 800. Let's say I want to make it rounded. I can do rounded. I could do rounded full. Makes it a little bit more rounded. So I can always go to this class well that overrides it. And the way in the background is it basically does a Tailwind merge of these classes onto the button. If you need even more additional changes to this button, is that you can go into this button here, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's this big config, and this big object is essentially every single Tailwind utility class that is added on to this button. And you can, if you like, to change any of this. So we have this base, font, rounded. The way you can do that is you can use this UI, and you basically bind this UI, and then it's this object. Now, I have not been able to get TypeScript to work to get the correct types, but you can always look here to see what they are. Here is rounded, and then single quote, I can do rounded full. So if we go back here before I save it, let's delete this first. Okay, so here it is without any rounded, but I can do rounded full, and this actually adds it in there. And so you can override basically every single style that you want using this UI pattern here. If you didn't want to do this per component though, you can do it for the whole app. So if we go back to the app.config file, here it is. So I'm gonna go here, I'm just gonna delete this here. I'm just gonna leave it the default button. Like I showed you earlier, we can go into UI in here too. And then UI has a whole bunch of different things, different components you can override. And by the way, there is one called strategy, and strategy allows you to do merge or override. This whole time I've been talking to you guys about adding different classes, and those are all really using Tailwind merge. But if you want to use Tailwind override, it essentially overrides all the Tailwind utility classes for that one. I'm going to keep it on merge, but it's good to know that you can use override and completely change the classes and not merge them. But going back to our example before, let's do button here. And I kind of like this a little bit better, especially if I'm going to change it. Probably if you're going to change one button, you might change every single button in your project. So I like this idea. Rounded is here, but I can just put in the class. So I can do rounded full. And if I change it, nothing happens. But if I stop and restart the server, so you see here, now we have this completely rounded button. Let's say I wanted to also change the colors. There's a primary, and this is essentially the color that every single component will have as its primary color that you'll see. And let's say I want to change that to purple, like we did before. If I save it, once again, I have to stop and restart the server. Cool, so now you see my purple button here. Also, there's a whole bunch of loading states. If I add loading to the button, now I can have this kind of loading spinner. I can also even change the loading icon that I want. These icons here are all part of hero icons. So if I look up the hero icons in the documentation, and by default, the hero icons are installed, but I can install more icon packs if I wanted to. Here's the hero icons. Let me see for a spinner right now. It's using this circular one, but let's say I wanted to add this arrow up circle. So I'm gonna copy this here. The way it's gonna work, I'm gonna paste it here, but it's gonna be I dash, and then this will be a dash as well. Now I have the new hero icon that is on there and it's working. I can also add any icon, any of these hero icons anywhere, and the compiler is smart enough not to include every single icon, only the ones I use in my project. So I feel like this is a good introduction to it. I'll put a link down in the description to another video of someone that has gone through the Nuxt UI a little bit more in depth than this one. If you guys want a little bit more information, I'll include it. So I think the next thing you need to do is to actually try this out with a back end. And my favorite back end, of course, is on AWS Amplify. So I'm going to really quickly get an AWS Amplify backend up and running, and then we're going to use a JavaScript library that Amplify offers that works really well with Nuxt. And I'll walk you guys how that works. Thanks. So we're going to use AWS Amplify, and we have a brand new documentation site I'm really proud of. We're going to do this a couple of different ways. First, we're going to create some infrastructure. So we're going to create a backend that has AppSync, which will be our manage GraphQL service where we're going to kind of query for some data to show using our new Nuxt UI components. And we just recently added some new documentation, how to set up Nuxt for all this. And I think this really works really well with different component frameworks in Tailwind and this new Nuxt UI. To start off with, I'm in the root of my Nuxt app, and I'm going to run npm create amplify at latest. And make sure you put at latest, otherwise you might get an older version of our create tool. And then this should go ahead and create our latest here. All right, so it's done installing. Now, I do want to say that this is using the new AWS Amplify new Code First DX Gen 2. Now, this is in developer preview, meaning that we're really looking for feedback from you guys on it if you guys use it. We are adding more features to it every day, and it should go for GA or general availability later this year. So I just want to caveat that this is just sort of a preview right now. If you guys want to see a more full in-depth deep dive into Gen 2, I created a full stack video where I actually host it on our Amplify hosting. It's a lot of fun, so check that. I'll put a link in the description as well on that. So what this did, if we go into our app and we look at it, we have now a new folder, and it's called Amplify. And inside Amplify, we have this auth and data. And if you look inside here, what it's doing is it's creating a to-do model. And this to-do model just has one value, content, and it says basically it allows owner, allows public to read. So only people who are logged in can make changes or updates, but anybody can read it. And I can come down here and just add in more. These are more fields in this model schema. Let's say I wanted to add in tweet. I don't know, maybe it's a tweet. I can add it as a string as well. For the sake of this video, I really want to focus on the next part. So I'm just going to leave it all defaulted in here. It gives you a whole bunch of instructions of what all this does. It also creates this auth folder. And in this auth folder, it's creating a new Cognito user pool. To actually get this up and running, we're going to run this command called npx amplify sandbox. And what that's going to do is going to take all these folders and it's going to create the backend. And by the way, if I wanted to do more additional work to this, I can actually drop down to something called the Cloud Development Kit layer or CDK layer and write everything as infrastructure as code. I made a video on that too if you want to go into a more advanced use case. So this will just take a moment. Don't worry about this red text here. Everything's fine. And it's going to go ahead and create the stack. This actually, if you have never used Amplify before, you actually need to follow one more extra step. You'll have to configure your AWS account to use Amplify, and what that'll do is it'll bootstrap your account for you using the CDK, and it'll also add some files to your local file system. In our official documentation, if you come into Amplify docs for Gen 2, you only get two options, the next page router and the app router. Really, we do support Nuxt as well, and that's what I'm going to show you. So what you want to do is go back to the official documentation at docs.amplify.aws, and you can just search, and I just searched for Nuxt. And if you look here, there's server-side rendering with React, and then there's the top one, use Amplify categories API Nuxt 3. What we did is we give you basically information of how to set this all up. And let's just follow this documentation and get it all set up. So first it says, if you haven't already done so, create a plugins folder. So if you look here, I don't have a plugins folder yet. So let's use our handy dandy advanced new file. And we're going to create a plugins folder. And then it says to create this new one called Amplify apis.client.ts. So it created that one. And then it actually wants you to create a server one as well. So let's do that real quickly. So let's start with the client one. And if you know anything about Nuxt, the plugins folder is the way you can add in extra additional features inside your Nuxt app. And what I do is I'm lazy. I'm just going to copy and paste this directly in here. But we'll take a quick look. First, it says it's looking for this Amplify configuration file. It hasn't been created yet. We'll have to wait until this is done, but we'll double check to make sure it's correct after it's done. And what it's doing is it's defining this Nuxt plugin. It's going to make sure that your whole app is configured. And this is normally what you do with any sort of Amplify app. You have to just run this Amplify configure. And then it's going to have this provide section. And what this allows you to do is you can use this this right here. It says use Nuxt app.amplify.auth.fetch auth session. So inside your application, you now can use this use Nuxt app composable and then pull in $amplify and then receive all these common methods that you'll use, like signing in, signing out, storage, list, GraphQL, everything you need. And of course you can delete this if you didn't need any, if you weren't using storage or if you're not using GraphQL, you can delete the ones in here. So that's how you set this one up. The next one's the server. So I'm going to copy that. So I'm going to go into the server file and I'm going to paste that. Now this is a lot larger, a little bit more complicated. I'm going to walk you through what it says and why you should look at it. So first, you may notice, once again, it's kind of complaining about the Amplify configuration, but we'll have that soon. Essentially what it's doing is we made the flexibility of the JavaScript v6 library, that's this AWS Amplify library. We made it very flexible that it should work with not just Next.js, but with Nuxt.js. And really you can configure it for even outside providers, outside credential providers that aren't even part of AWS at all. So for example, using Okta or something else like that. So at the end of the day, what this is going to do when it sets up the token provider and this gets ran, you should be able to access the GraphQL utilities. All right, so the sandbox is created. And so what this is an ephemeral environment that we can use for testing locally. The next step after we were done creating this app, we would push this up to the Amplify backend. We're not going to do that in this video, but you can do that. And then you can have all this up in a production environment, which is really nice. And then you can also host the front end on AWS Amplify hosting, which is also another thing we support. All right, so this is everything here. Now, if we go back to our documentation, they have an example of using async data. So let's take a look at how we can use this now. So to continue on, we actually need to create some GraphQL files that will help us run our APIs. So these files are our schema, so basically our queries, our mutations using GQL. So we can automatically generate all those for ourselves so we don't have to necessarily write that. We can get this a couple of ways. If we go into the AppSync console, you can grab the schema from there, but there's actually a command line utility that's really helpful that will help us with this. If we look at the official documentation in the docs, it says that you can generate these with this codegen add command, and you need to give it the API ID, basically the AppSync API ID and the region. And to get those, we can get a couple of different ways. If you are using Studio or CLI, you can grab that directly from the Amplify configuration JSON file or AWS exports. If we go into our app, and this is the sandbox running that we started earlier, we can get that information from here. We can see, one, we have this auth region US West 2. And then if we look at this AWS AppSync API ID, here it is here. So if I put that together using the terminal command, I'm going to copy and paste this from my other section, from my other monitor. Here it is. So I'm going to go ahead and run it, and it should ask us a few questions, and we'll answer it here. So first, what type of app we're building? JavaScript, of course. We're using Vue in this case. There's no Nuxt, but that's it. And so now it'll grab the API details. And since we're using TypeScript, make sure you choose TypeScript here. And it's going to create a new folder called source. If you don't want it to create a source folder, that's fine. I just leave it as default. It's not a big deal. There's nothing else in that folder other than these files. And I'm just going to hit yes here. Maximum statement of depth, I'm going to put 2. If you had it has the correct types. And I'm just going to hit yes here. This just says, do you want to generate for your newly created API? And so it'll go ahead and create everything for us. Awesome. So here it went ahead and created the source/GraphQL folder and then source API.ts. And if we look here up a little bit and we go to our source folder, here it is. Now we see this GraphQL that has the mutations, query subscriptions, and our API.ts. So the next part we need to do is see if we can query these APIs. What's nice, since we already set up the plugins for client and server, it doesn't matter if we're on the server or client, it'll automatically detect it and run the correct query for us. So let's do that. All right, so I cleaned up some of the code here, and I have this new to-do app. It's really simple. You just type something in this box and you hit add to do, or you submit it essentially. I went ahead and used some of the Nuxt UI components to make this a little easier, and I'll show you. So first, of course, I'm using Tailwind's utility classes everywhere. I'm using a UI input with a to-do. I have a UI button here. And then down here, I have cards. So once we have a list of to-dos, we'll use the U card. We'll have this template, and then we'll have a content, which we'll create here in a second. I used one of the hero icons for the trash can. And by the way, the reason it shows this trash can here and not the actual text is because I have another extension that converts all icons to just display them, which is kind of nice. I just have a click handler here to do this on-click delete. So I have a little button to delete them. And then I also showed the ID. So I kind of just show the content and the ID to give an idea how it is. And then I just had to submit. So for the actual code, we'll have three different three different functions. One, we're going to use async data to run things as if they're on the server. We're going to use on submit and then on click delete. We're going to use this use Nuxt app. So if you remember when I created the client, that $amplify is now available with all the functions we need to run on the client and on the server. And since we're using since we're going to be using use async data, we'll see how that works. And we're going to be using GraphQL, our GraphQL service, to add data and delete data. We're going to grab our queries. These are the ones that we just generated a few moments ago. And we're also going to need to grab the mutations so we can delete things. So first, let's start with the use async data. We're going to return a list of to-dos. I'm going to just console.log them out. And then I'm going to use this one called graphql.client.graphql. And this is all typed, by the way. So as I type things in, it'll work. So for this result here, we're going to have a query. We're going to do list to-dos. And that should be it to grab the list. Now for the on submit, first we're going to check to see if the to-do.value is empty. If not, we'll return. That's this ref that we created earlier. We'll do a refresh. If you don't know, in this use async data, it returns a refresh, which is really handy. So that way we don't have to add any subscriptions or anything. Anytime we add a new piece of data, we'll just do a refresh and it'll run the async data and display the correct data for us. And then we're going to use, let me scroll up a little bit. We'll use this GraphQL client.graphql. And this is the mutation will be create to do. And then of course we'll need to send it what the mutation will be. And this will be this variables. And then inside here, we'll have an input with the content of to-do.value. And then lastly, we'll have this on click delete. So this one is the same method that we created, this GraphQL client GraphQL. We're going to do a delete to do, but this time we need to pass in the one we want to delete, which we're going to use as variables. And then we'll have the ID here. And of course, at the end, we want to make sure we refresh. So if we did this all correctly, this should work. And by the way, you might notice these data and errors. We're not really doing anything with this, but this is after you delete, it does return back the item that you deleted. It also has errors. So if for some reason this failed, we can then check the errors. But let's take a look at what it looks like. So I have my to-do here. I'll just do a quick refresh and I'll start the server again. One thing too to keep in mind, I did off camera. Normally when you do additions or deletions to an API, you probably want it to have it behind some authentication or authorization system to make sure you know who they are before they start deleting or adding things. For the sake of this demo, if I went back to this data resource here, this used to show only owners, meaning people who created it could update or delete it, and then anybody who's public can read it. So I just made a quick change here so anybody who's public can update, read, or delete just for the sake of this demo. Like I said, if you want to get more into the complexities of creating schemas here, I have a whole video on it. I'll link in the description of how you can really do some complex authorization rules in here. So here's my to-do. Let's say the first one is mowing the lawn. I'm going to add it in here. Cool. So it added up. My Nuxt UI card is showing up. My hero icon showing up. I put this kind of light blue text. I'm not sure if I really love that. Let me change it. Let's see here. I have the UI button. It's square. Right here, I have text blue 200. I'm just gonna make that a little bit darker. I'm gonna do 600 here. Okay, I like that better. So mowing the lawn, I'm going to do shop for groceries, and here it is right below it. And if I click one of these buttons, it refreshes the page, it deletes it. I can delete both of them. Great. So awesome. This is just kind of the tip of the iceberg on what you can do with the Nuxt UI library and also the Amplify library. If you guys are interested, I can do more videos on this. What's really neat too, and I'm not going to show it in this video, but if we go back to the official documentation, you can set up middlewares to protect your route. So let's say, for example, a user logs in and you want only certain users to go certain routes. There's a whole middleware and you can redirect out of it, and that works great. You can also set up API routes, of course, in Nuxt, and they have this whole implementation where you create an Amplify utils file under the utils folder, and it allows you quite quickly to run values on the server side using the Nuxt route. This is a lot to take in, but if you guys are interested, I'll probably be doing more tutorials on Nuxt in the future, showing more of this, deploying it to hosting for fun. But I just wanted to show a little bit about both of how to use Nuxt UI and how to use the AWS Amplify Gen 2 and the new JavaScript library that supports Nuxt. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next. Thanks.